All right. 10:31, we might have a few more people joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome. Thank you all for joining. This is the TRPA overview for real estate professionals. And we'll make sure this is working. My name is Victoria Ortiz. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at TRPA. And to get everyone started, we're going to just do some general guidelines. As you probably figured out by now, everyone is muted. We are going to be using the question and answer or Q&A box to submit questions throughout the presentation. Questions may be summarized if we are doing it verbally, and the recording and slides will be sent after the presentation. So a little bit of background on who we are. The Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, or TRPA, was the nation's first bi-state environmental planning agency, and we lead our region's efforts to protect our spectacular environment while supporting our communities to prosper economically. And as real estate professionals, you probably frequently get the question, who is TRPA and why do I have to work with them? So I'm going to give you just one slide of historical context, and then we will dive into some deeper topics on permitting and ADUs and all of those good things. So as background, as many of you know, a lot of the Tahoe Basin was built out between the 50s and the 70s to support the growing tourism industry here in Tahoe. And in the 60s, the Olympics really put Tahoe on the map as a year-round destination, and rampant development ensued. So originally, a city the size of San Francisco was envisioned, and to put that in perspective, we have a full-time population here of about 65,000 permanent residents, and the city of San Francisco has about 750,000 residents. So you can imagine how different Tahoe might have looked had that panned out with that original vision. And TRPA was created at this time when the states of California and Nevada came together and approved a bi-state compact to oversee land use and development in Lake Tahoe. Congress ratified this agreement, and TRPA was born in 1969. And today, urban development makes up about 10% of the land use in the Tahoe Basin. And although that may seem like a relatively small percentage, development has huge environmental impacts. So for instance, on the lower left, you'll see the Upper Truckee Marsh where the Tahoe Keys were built. And when people built on these sensitive areas that once acted as natural filters for water, such as the Upper Truckee Marsh, pollution now had a direct line to enter Tahoe. So this led to decreased lake clarity and large algal blooms. And older development is often a significant source of water pollution. We now know that 70% of the fine sediment that enters the lakes is from private properties, roadways, and asphalt parking areas. And we work with myriad partners, both private and public, in the basin to oversee land use as well as transportation in the basin. And everyone has a role to play. So that's partly why you'll hear later today in the presentation, all developed properties need best management practices, or BMPs, in order to prevent that erosion and pollution from entering the lake. So we are a planning agency, and as such, we adopt plans and regulations for Tahoe to help achieve and maintain the region's environmental goals, while at the same time providing opportunities for orderly growth and development. So this measured and responsible growth property has been shown to protect our natural resources as well as preserve property values over time. So a little bit of background on TRPA. Now, what are we going to dive into today? We have these 7 different sections. After each one, we are going to have 5 minutes for questions and answers. Again, if you have any questions as we're going through this, feel free to just drop those into the Q&A box. And our lovely planners who are joining us today will go ahead and respond to those throughout the presentation, as well as, like I said, after each section, we'll have some time to answer those verbally. So we're going to start with some of the online tools, things that you should have saved and bookmarked. We'll go through some housing updates, things that have happened recently and in the last couple of years, BMPs, like I said, best management practice requirements, permits, coverage, development rights, and we'll have a brief section on piers and moorings. So that gives you a little layout. We have until noon for this webinar. We don't necessarily need to take that whole time if we answer all your questions before then, but we anticipate the presentation lasting about an hour. For those of you who have been here for a while, you probably know that in 2020, we started doing these webinars virtually, and we've seen great participation. So we want to continue to provide this resource to the real estate community. If you need more information, you are welcome to go online to TRPA's Vimeo account, where we have not only previous versions of this webinar recorded, but a lot of helpful videos about tree removal permits, coverage, development rights, and so much more. So I hope that you all will take a second to go check out the Vimeo page and see the resources that are there. So a couple online tools that I hope you already have bookmarked, but if not, hopefully you will after this presentation. First off, we updated our website a couple years ago to be trpa.gov rather than .org. And we also redesigned the site. So we tried to make it easier for you and others to find what they need, because there's a lot of information and a lot of pages on our site. So we have a permitting tab, the drop-down menu, that's the second in from the top, and it has all of the resources and links to permits and requests that you might need there. We also have what we call the parcel tracker. This is parcels.laketahoeinfo.org, and this is a clearinghouse for information about properties within the Tahoe region. It includes things such as deed restrictions, land capability information, development rights associated with the parcel, and a summary of TRPA permit records. So extremely helpful if you're looking at a property that's about to be listed or that is listed for sale, to understand some of that basic information. So with that, I don't see any questions in the Q&A so far, but again, if you have any, feel free to drop them in there and we will answer them as they arise. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Karen Fink to take it from here.
Thanks, Vee. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Karen Fink. I'm TRPA's Housing Program Manager, and I'm going to talk about some current TRPA programs that we have to encourage affordable housing, including housing for local workers, workers of all income levels, and some new changes that we're working on now. And I'm going to try to advance the slides. They are not advancing. So maybe Jessica, you might want to take, all right, let me try one more thing. Yeah, Jessica, could you maybe take back advancing the slides? Thanks. So when TRPA is developing changes to update our code related to housing, we actually develop and vet all of these changes through an advisory working group called the Tahoe Living, Housing, and Community Revitalization Working Group. And this is a multi-member stakeholder group with representatives who have expertise and interest in housing and the environment. And we do have real estate professionals represented on this group. So, and at the end of the presentation, I'll tell you how you can participate in these meetings. Next slide, please. I know everyone is aware of the housing shortage and how it affects our communities. You may have experienced yourself in many ways how staffing shortages, for instance, have affected your lives. For instance, at the school district, I know that many kids have been not able to fully participate in after-school sports because of a shortage of bus drivers. And during this challenging winter, sometimes schools even weren't able to open because there was a shortage of plow drivers being able to get our roads open. And that's just one example, but it's really affecting many sectors. Next slide, please. And then, as you all are surely really familiar with, our home prices have been skyrocketing, and the median single family home price in Lake Tahoe as a whole in 2021 was around $950,000. So TRPA has been taking a look at our land use regulations, and many other regions are doing this as well, to understand how our regulations are actually contributing potentially to home prices. And we're finding that our regulations actually make it pretty fairly hard to build some of the smaller units that might be more affordable, and they make it easier to build larger homes that are usually out of reach for our local households. So we are taking a look at these regulations, and we've already made some changes. Next slide, please. So in 2021, we made changes to make it easier to build accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs. And ADUs are a small unit that is built on the same parcel as a primary home. And they can be attached to the main home, detached, or they can be conversion of existing space. Next slide, please. So previously, before 2021, TRPA only allowed ADUs on parcels that were greater than 1 acre in size. But in 2021, we changed our rules to allow accessory dwelling units on any residential parcel on the California side. On the Nevada side, there was quite a bit of concern related to the fact that Nevada does not have the same limits on using accessory dwelling units for vacation rentals as California does. So for now, the change only applies on the California side. But we allowed them on any residential parcel up to 2 accessory dwelling units per parcel. However, TRPA's coverage and growth management requirements still apply. Next slide, please. So just to build on that a little bit, TRPA's growth management system requires that an ADU obtain a residential unit of use, also known as an RUU, and that's really the permission to build 1 unit. So these residential units of use can be purchased on the open market, but they can be hard to find and they can also be costly. So to encourage accessory dwelling units and other types of affordable and workforce housing, TRPA has a bonus unit incentive program. So, and that was created in 2018. So through this program, TRPA offers free residential development rights, and those free units are called bonus units for people who are willing to deed restrict an accessory dwelling unit or any kind of unit to affordable or moderate income levels or achievable levels. And achievable is not tied to income, but is instead tied to working for a local employer. And that ability to have that deed restriction be tied to households that are working for a local employer is a change that we just made a couple of months ago. So if you deed restrict a unit and you get a bonus unit, you're also eligible for other incentives, such as some fee waivers, in addition to getting that free bonus unit. And then I also just want to point out that bonus units are only available in the area shown in green. That's called the bonus unit boundary. And that is basically the area that's within walking distance to transit or town centers. Next slide, please. We do want to make sure that deed restricted units that are receiving incentives, such as fee waivers, are really being used as intended. So deed restricted units must submit, or the owners of these units must submit, an annual compliance form. And when the unit is sold, the owner must submit a real estate disclosure form. And both of these are available online, and they should be submitted through our Citizens Access database. And then finally, I do want to mention that we have some older units around the basin, particularly in Incline Village, that were deed restricted many years ago before we created our bonus unit incentive program and before compliance rules were clearly spelled out in the deed restriction itself. However, even if the compliance mechanism is not spelled out, the deed restricted units, the deed restrictions are still enforceable on these older units. So real estate agents should be aware that if you see a deed restriction pop up on a title report, even if it's older and even if it has an old assessor parcel number, if it's associated with the parcel, the current parcel that has that title report, that is an enforceable deed restriction. So next slide, please. So now we have a quick poll, and I think V is going to pop the poll up. And the question is, were you familiar with TRPA's regulations allowing accessory dwelling units on the California side prior to this workshop?
All right, we've got about half the people participated, so we'll give it another 5 seconds. All right, and I'm gonna end the poll and share the results.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. We just want to make sure that we're sharing information that's useful to you. So it sounds like not quite half of the people had heard about them. Some people hadn't, and some people had some knowledge. So next slide, please. So thank you. So finally, I just wanted to note that now we're moving forward with some additional considered changes to our development rights, such as allowing increased height, coverage, and density for deed-restricted units to, again, try to really encourage units to make it easier and lower costs for units that are, priced correctly for our local workers and lower and moderate income households. So if you would like to hear about opportunities for input on those proposals, you can email me and I can add you to our housing email list. And my email is there, shown on the slide, kthink@trpa.gov. And also through this list, I also announce when we are having those Tahoe Living working group meetings, and those are really open to the public, and we have a public participation time during all of those meetings. So we really encourage anyone who's interested to let me know, and I'll add you to the working group list. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. So we have a couple questions in the chat. The first one is, who is responsible for enforcing the deed restrictions? And she asked specifically about the older deed restrictions. And maybe you can speak to if it's different on the Nevada side versus California side.
So if it's a TRPA deed restriction, TRPA is responsible. There are some other deed restrictions throughout the area that may have been issued by another jurisdiction, like the city of South Lake Tahoe, but it says clearly on the deed restriction, who's the entity that's responsible.
Okay, great. So you would need to find that on the deed restriction itself. Thank you. Okay, and then do you have a sense for how many deed restricted units have been built so far?
So there's about 250 deed restricted units in the basin right now. And since we instituted the bonus unit incentive program, we have issued a little over 30 deed restrictions. So that's since 2018.
Okay, thank you. And someone just said that they've seen deed restrictive properties sell outside of their restrictions by selling to all cash buyers. Is that allowed?
That's not allowed. And we've actually recently launched an outreach program to all of the to the owners of deed restricted units to make sure that they understand that, the terms of the deed restriction. And we're continuing communication with them and also starting to work on enforcing those units on a case-by-case basis.
Great, thank you. And the last question we have here is, can you explain a little bit about the typical deed restrictions? What are they?
So I'd really like to focus on the newer deed restrictions that we have now, that we offer moving forward. So basically, if someone is building, say, just for example, building an accessory dwelling unit, and you're willing to deed restrict it, you can choose to deed restrict it to someone who makes less. There's different deed restriction categories. So one is an affordable deed restriction, and that's for households that make less than 80% of area median income. The next level is moderate, and that's for households that make less than 120% of area median income. And then we have a category called achievable, and that is for households that either make less than 120% of area median income, so those two categories that I just talked about, or if their income is above moderate, then they have to show that they work for a local employer within the Tahoe Truckee region. So, that's kind of the main criteria for qualifying for a a bonus unit and getting that deed restriction. And then there's requirements like they have to submit an annual compliance form. We can audit and ask for additional documentation. And then there's that real estate disclosure form. So I think those are kind of the main points. And there's some other limitations, such as if you're purchasing the unit, your assets can't be above a certain amount.
Great. And we actually just had a question come in about coverage. So does this deed restriction change the coverage that's allowed?
No.
Great. Thank you. And could you also speak one more time? We'll do this as the last question verbally, but the advantage of deed restrictions versus simply adding an ADU. So maybe clarifying that bonus unit benefit and some of the fee waivers again.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you don't have to deed restrict an accessory dwelling unit, but in order to build an accessory dwelling unit, you do have to go out and get that right to build, which is called a residential unit of use. And so you have to go out and buy that on the open market, or some local jurisdictions, for instance, the city of South Lake Tahoe has made it pretty easy to get that residential unit of use through the city. So there are different ways of getting that permission to just build an accessory dwelling unit or any type of unit that doesn't have any restrictions on it. But if you get a bonus unit through us, we waive the application fees. There's a waiver currently in place of mobility mitigation fees. And then, we give you that bonus unit for free. So those are the main three incentives for deed restricting it right now, is the fee waivers and getting the bonus unit for free. Right. But then it does have to be restricted to the use that's in the deed restriction.
Right. And that would be the affordable, moderate
or achievable. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Karen, there's still a few questions that are open in the Q&A. So maybe when Trevor takes over, you can take a look at those and start answering them. Thank you everyone for those questions. Keep them coming throughout the presentation and we'll be sure to get through them. And like I said, we'll have about 5 minutes for Q&A after each section. So I think now it's going to Trevor.
Hey, everybody. Welcome and thanks again for joining us. My name is Trevor Smith and I'm the Permitting Services Planner. And I'm also the front lobby manager. So I handle a lot of the application intake at TRPA and then general customer service. And I've probably spoken to a lot of you over the phone about properties, parcels in Lake Tahoe and different things. So I'm going to be going over a couple different topics today. I'm going to take a deeper dive into the online tools that we covered at the beginning. I'm going to be going over some general coverage information and also where to apply for permits. So our MOU partners, as well as exempt activities and coverage exemptions. So here are some of the helpful resources again. So we have trpa.gov, Acella's Citizens Access, which is our application tool, and LakeTahoeInfo.org. To go over trpa.gov, when the slide advances here. There we go. So under that permitting tab, you'll see, applications and forms. As Bea said, this is all of our applications and related forms. You can take a look at those and see, how in depth you have to go into the checklist items of each application. And then homeowner info. This is, where you guys will find a lot of really good information on accessory dwelling units. We like folks to do their own research on ADUs if they can, just because there's so much to learn. Karen did a really good explanation of it, but it's nice to have it in writing and have it on hand. There's information on BMPs, frequently asked questions, and then the permitting process, which can be foreign to some people. So it's nice to have that all laid out in front of applicants as well as real estate professionals. And then under resources, there's anything from deed restrictions to coverage, some really helpful documents. And then there's our apply online button. which eventually will lead you to the apply online page. Once the slide advances here again, sorry, it's a little slow. There we go. So on the apply online page, there's the exempt activity information packets. So there's tons of information on here. Exempt activities, qualified exempt activities, as I said, where to go to apply. So that's our MOU partners, as well as a link to the parcel tracker, which I'll kind of go into a little bit later. There's super helpful tutorials on here. So, anything from creating the account, building the project, to attaching documents. It's really nice to just have those. You don't have to call us if you have an application that you're putting in. If your clients are wondering, how do I go about applying through TRPA? This is a really good place to lead them. And next slide, please. After you hit that apply online button, it'll take you to the Acela Citizens Access website. So this is our application portal. Our tutorials are also on this page. So you can go through those and applicants can create their account. That's what that red arrow's pointing towards. You can't really see it right now because it's in blue, but that's how to create an account there. In this day and age, we're really trying to encourage all folks to apply online if possible. It makes it easier for applicants to upload documents at their leisure. They don't have to drive by the office. And then also it makes it really easy for us to consolidate applications, keep them all in one place, and process them, in a timely fashion without having to upload and scan and, fax or something like that. And next slide, please. So LakeTahoeInfo.org, as V said, holds a ton of really good information on, just what's going on in the basin. But what we're going to focus on right now is the parcel tracker, which, it provides a really, really awesome resource for real estate professionals, as well as prospective home buyers, so that they can hop on here and they can search, with APN. As you can see, there's some search instructions there. So each county has a little bit different assessor parcel number, as you all probably know. And I tend to use that top right search bar there, just because it autofills. And I'll show you that here on the next slide. So it's really important when using the parcel tracker, especially if you're searching by address, to not type the entire address in. I know it's tempting to just copy and paste that, but as you can see, you'll type in 128 Market, and before you type in street, it'll actually pop up with that APN there. It'll show you the inactive one, and you can go ahead and click on the active one, and it'll load all of the information on that parcel. Next slide, please. So yeah, as B said, the parcel information, there's quite a bit. So, as you can see, there's an overview on the top. There's information on BMPs, land capability, coverage information, deed restrictions, as well as any applications that were previously submitted on the property and any permits that were issued from the TRPA and some of our MOU partners as well on that property. And then you could view the documents that were actually included in the applications, as well as, deed restrictions, any documents related to that property, which can be really useful for prospective home buyers to utilize going forward if they plan to have a project right off the bat when they buy the house, which a lot of folks do. And next slide, please. So the parcel tracker doesn't have everything yet. As you can imagine, we have an entire library of documents, paper documents on parcels. It is actually a almost two-story library, but we are working to upload all of those documents as quickly as we can. But if you do see that, there's not the information you're looking for on that parcel, you can hit this request updated information button, which is under the parcel overview. And we will take that request, and we'll usually take 1 to 3 days to upload those documents, depending on the volume of requests. We'll let you know when those have been uploaded. And that can give you and clients an idea of where they stand. So if you don't see your land capability or land coverage verifications on there, then that might prompt that client or the seller to get a site assessment so that they can give everybody the more information on their property, and then have an idea of where they can go from there. Next slide. So the parcel tracker, like I said, answers questions like, what can I build on this lot? Or what could I build on this lot if I bought this lot? So, in order to know what you can build, you need to know your allowable coverage, what you have existing on the property is coverage, as well as any deed restrictions or development rights. And there's a handful of other things. But I would say, our most common question is, what's the allowable coverage? What do I have on my property? What am I allowed to build from here? And so let's go over coverage just a little bit. Next slide. So what is coverage? Coverage is anything man modified on the ground that doesn't allow water to flow through it or native vegetation to grow in it. So examples of this are, houses, decks, paver patios, even bocce ball courts or dirt parking areas are considered coverage. So they do not let that water to flow through it or vegetation to grow in it. And so any coverage changes on a property, that triggers a permit. So it's really good to know when you're talking to clients, if they want to add something, if it's adding coverage, it requires a permit. Next slide, please. So, the next question is, where do I apply? So I want to add something on my property. Who do I apply with? So we have MOU partners, which basically is an agreement with the local jurisdictions in the Lake Tahoe Basin that allows them to do TRPA review on our behalf, which is really nice. So it's a one-stop shop. You can get both your building and your TRPA review done in the same spot, which is handy, time saver, and you don't have to be popping around to different websites. So the city of South Lake Tahoe does residential permits. Placer County and El Dorado County, they do both residential permits, site assessments, and verifications. And one caveat to this is all lakefront properties, no matter what jurisdiction that they're in, TRPA does the review, or the TRPA review for those. Next slide, please. So another question, you might get from clients or, can I remodel the inside of my home, or could I build a fence? And so it's really handy for you to know, some exempt activities with the TRPA, and this can be found on our website again, under applications and forms, also on that apply online page. But interior remodeling is an exempt activity. Ordinary maintenance and repair, also exempt, as long as not structural, nothing structural is happening. Grading less than 3 cubic yards is exempt. Residential fences less than 6 feet and not in a stream environment zone, as long as it does not block views of the lake, then it is exempt. And basically that means that you don't have to apply for a permit, and there's no TRPA noticing required. So none of those things require TRPA applications. And like I said, a list of these activities are on our website. And next slide, please. So there are some coverage exemptions, which was adopted in 2012. So in order to qualify for coverage exemptions, which we'll go over what those are in a second, a property must be high land capability. So in IPES, or the individual parcel evaluation system, that's a score of 726 or higher, or a Bailey score of 4 through 7. Those are high land capabilities and do qualify. You do have to have BMPs installed on the property. And then all mitigation of excess coverage has to be mitigated. Next slide, please. So these are the 3 types of coverage exemptions. So a non-permanent structure, such as a shed or a greenhouse, 120 square feet or less with no foundation is exempt from coverage, as well as pervious decks that allow water to flow through them with no coverage below them and BMPs underneath, as well as pervious pavers. So those, allow water to flow through. You can do some research online. There's some approved pervious pavers, and we also have those in our coverage exemption packet, which you guys should all get sent out to you. I think you might have already gotten it sent out to you in the exemptions packet or the information packets, so you can see those for details. Next slide, please. So there's a lot going on with TRPA, and we know that things can be confusing, especially for people moving up here. So we do have a general line that people can contact us on. We have a planner on call each day. That line does get highly impacted during the summer, spring to summer. Of course, there's lots of questions coming in, so we do appreciate people's patience. It generally takes us, we can return the call within 1 day or the next day, but generally that day we'll give you a call back. Like I said, TRPA, oh, actually, I didn't mention this, but we have a general email as well. So it's trpa@trpa.gov. You can email us any general questions, and then any application specific questions, intake@trpa.gov is really handy for that. And one thing I didn't put on here, but our front lobby is open. Currently, we just have it open for Tuesday through Friday, and it's limited services. We have a receptionist up there that can, help guide applicants through some basic things, and then also they'll, put you in touch with a planner on that planner on call line if needed. But yeah, that's some general information and some of our frequently asked questions. And let us know if you have any further questions on here.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Appreciate it. That's a lot of information. And I know it's definitely, like you said, some frequently asked questions. So hopefully that helped. We did have some more questions come through on the Q&A during your presentation, and Allie and others have been answering some of them as we go. So thank you to those planners who are answering them on the back end. The first one I wanted to ask you is, can an agent request updated information on behalf of their client?
They can.
So this would be through Parcel Tracker.
Yeah, you can. So you can just fill out the little form. It's a request form, and it does not require you to put any of the owner information in or verify that you're the owner.
Okay, great. Thank you. And could you answer how TRPA records differ from the records at each county or each jurisdiction? For instance, would a real estate professional need to check both the county and TRPA records, or would either one be consistent?
Yeah, so we do retrieve county records and put them on our website. There is somewhat of a lag time, I would say, between the county and TRPA. So, if you get a site assessment through El Dorado County, if the property is in El Dorado County, definitely take a look at the parcel tracker and request updated information. But also you can reach out to the county to see if those site assessments are available through them.
Okay. Let's see, there's a question here on, is it true that the Tahoe Keys are allowed 30% coverage on each lot?
Yes, I believe The Tahoe Keys is generally class 6, so that is 30% coverage. Yeah, because it was a man modified area, there's many reasons behind that, but the Tahoe Keys area is class 6. You are correct.
And again, if you had any questions on a specific parcel, you could go to the parcel tracker and it will have the land capability information on there.
That's right.
Great. Let's see, there's one question just generally on where TRPA jurisdiction lies. And so I might just take that question, Trevor, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So we oversee everything within the watershed. So if you picture a drop of water landing anywhere on the mountains, if it came into Lake Tahoe, that would be TRPA jurisdiction. We have maps available on our website, but basically it does not include Truckee. It ends over, and it doesn't include Palisades and that area. So it would be Tahoe City. And you can see the exact lines on the map and we can find that for you. Okay, we have a few more questions in there, Trevor. So I'm going to ask you to go through those and see if you can answer some of them. And in the meantime, we will move along to Shay.
All right, thanks, V. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Shay Navarro. I'm TRPA's Watersheds and Water Quality Program Manager, and I'm going to be talking about TRPA's best management practices or BMP requirements. And most of you should be aware of these. Next slide. TRPA's BMP requirements aim to prevent soil erosion as well as capture and infiltrate or treat stormwater runoff that's generated from the property, generated by impervious surfaces such as roofs, driveways, parking areas, decks, things like that. And typical residential BMPs include driveway paving, conveyances to move runoff to an infiltration system, drip line infiltration and fire defensible space provisions, slope stabilization, as well as use of vegetation and mulch to stabilize soil. Next slide. And your role as real estate professionals is to disclose the BMP status of a property to new buyers at the point of sale. And here is language from our code. There is a disclosure form that needs to be completed and signed and submitted to TRPA by the buyer within 30 days from the point of sale. Next slide. Here is what that form looks like, and it is found, it can be found on our website. And I believe we have an example or a link provided in resources with this training as well for that form. Next slide. So installation and maintenance of BMPs will be triggered if any permits are pulled on a property, like a remodel, an addition, or a tear down rebuild. Otherwise, TRPA coordinates with local jurisdictions to enforce on properties without BMPs or that are in need of maintenance in total maximum daily load or TMDL priority areas. And we also respond to complaints. So, you know, should there be a neighbor who complains about an unpaved driveway and a lot of sediment getting tracked onto the roadway, it's possible that that property could receive a letter and also be flagged in the parcel tracker as being under enforcement. So the parcel tracker is the first step in finding out BMP status. I know Trevor went through this in more, gave some general information about the parcel tracker. So if you click on parcel details, the BMP compliance status section pops up. And on this page, if the property is certified, you can print the certificate for your or the property owner's records. So I'm just going to go over some of the information that's listed here. Here it'll say whether there's a BMP certificate, what the date that certificate was issued, as well as the certificate number. The update or reissue date is put in there once maintenance has been verified. And that is something that not all, all properties are required to install and maintain BMPs for the life of the property. And we typically are following up with commercial and large multifamily properties every 5 years in these priority catchments to verify maintenance. And this is where that is shown, if your date is within 5 years for commercial and large multifamily, then you are in compliance. And if not, we'd like to verify maintenance, and then we can update it with a current date. Source control certificate issued is just a different type of BMP certificate. When infiltration is not possible on a site, then you still have to do what are called source control BMPs. These are BMPs to stabilize soil, like paving or using vegetation or mulch to keep sediment on site and prevent erosion. Certificate required. Some parcels, as V mentioned with her question that she answered just before, are not actually within the watershed of Lake Tahoe. So for example, some at the very top of Kingsbury are technically outside of our watershed, but they still can be listed on the tracker. And so that's why we have this certificate required section for you to know that yes, BMPs are in fact required for this property. Area-wide treatment participant. This is when a property is able to contribute their runoff to a regional treatment system, and they'll still have to do source control BMPs and fire defensible space on the site. But typically they would need permission from the local jurisdiction to participate in the area-wide treatment program, and different requirements can apply. Some properties have to pay a fee. Some properties have to pre-treat their runoff prior to discharging it to the regional system. And we try to provide that information. It'll list, if you are in an area-wide treatment location, there will be the name of that project that the property is located in. And if they don't have a BMP certificate yet, then it can often be less expensive for the property to contribute to the regional treatment system or area-wide treatment system than do on-site BMPs. Special circumstances are when there are site constraints or situations on the property where that prevent that property from infiltrating the runoff, which is the best way for the property to treat runoff. But things like high groundwater, bedrock, steep slopes can often make that ability to infiltrate unfeasible. So there still will need to be source control BMPs to stabilize sediment. And once they're in compliance, then a source control certificate would be issued showing that the property is in substantial compliance until an area-wide treatment program is available. Then they would have to participate in that to be in compliance, and that all that language is on the source control certificate. So we have a BMP hotline. If you have specific questions, you can call the 202 line, 775-589-5202 for any BMP questions, or email bmp@trpa.gov, and we're happy to answer any questions for you. And I think that's it. Next slide. Okay, I think I went over the BMP point of sale requirements, which are available online. And then, as Karen mentioned, there's some deed restriction disclosures that need to be done for ADUs, I guess. And then there's also a wood heater retrofit disclosure form. And both of these can be found on our citizen access database, which Trevor walked you through in his presentation. Next slide.
Excellent. Thank you, Shay. Always good to do a review of BMPs. We actually don't have any questions in the chat that I'm seeing. Oh, wait, no, I do have one. Here we go. Will TRPA sometimes do free BMP site evaluations?
We had a much more robust program in the past to provide that information, but we have a list of resource professionals on our website of contractors that can come out and, do assess a property for what kind of BMPs they would need. Sometimes general BMP information is included on a site assessment for a property, or if people aren't sure, there might be some BMPs in place. We do honor old BMPs. So looking at what old permits or plans might have been approved for a property on the parcel tracker can provide existing BMP information as well. But definitely just contact the BMP hotline and we can help find information. It should show on whether or not an old evaluation was done for the site or not.
Great. Thank you, Shay. And just a reminder to everyone, we will be sending out the recording and the slides after the presentation. Hopefully you all received an email letting you know about this webinar. If you didn't, I'm happy to add you to our e-news, and you can go ahead and just put your email in that question and answer, and I'll be sure to add it to that e-news. All right, I think with that, Shay, there might be some more questions that come in on the Q&A, but we will pass it along to Allie.
All right, well, thanks, Shay. Hi, everyone. I'm Allie Borowski. I'm a planner with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. I'm going to be talking about coverage, development rights, transfers, and fun things like that. So next slide, please. One more slide, please. So I first want to talk about coverage. So the main question everyone wants to know is how much coverage is my property allowed? So I want to go through some terms that we use a lot. So there's something called base allowable coverage. And what base allowable coverage is it's determined by the land capability or IPE score of the property. And so this is specific to every single property. So we will talk about Bailey's score in a minute, and then the IPE score in a minute also. There's something called max allowable, and that's actually a table that you can find in the TRPA Code of Ordinances, Chapter 30. I have that table on another slide that we'll talk about, but that could be another way to determine what's allowed on the property in terms of coverage. I think everyone's probably heard of this grandfathered in coverage. And so what that means is a property was most likely developed, or it was developed prior to TRPA really adopting the Code of Ordinances. So developed really before the 80s. And so we know a majority of properties were developed prior to that. And so there's typically more coverage than we would allow today. So depending what your base allowable coverage is, and then what was verified as legally existing determines what would be grandfathered in. So above what we would allow today again. So every property is unique, just like everyone on this call. We all have our own unique DNA, our own unique history, our own unique personality. Every property in the Lake Tahoe Basin is also unique. So it's really important to look at each property specifically. We can't compare ourselves to others. We also cannot compare parcels to each other because the history on the parcel is different. The soil type may be different. The slope may be different. So you definitely want to check laketahoeinfo.org to see what information we have on a property. And that verification process is the only way to determine exactly what's allowed. So a lot of properties don't have a site assessment or a coverage verification or land capability verification. So that is the absolute first step to determine what's allowed today. So next slide, please. So IPES versus Bailey, or a Bailey score. So IPES is Individual Parcel Evaluation System. It applies to all vacant parcels or homes built after 1987. So IPES is only for single family dwellings and only for vacant properties, or like I said, homes that were built since the adoption of the IPES system, which was 1987. So it's a score from 1 to 1,050, which you can see is a very wide range. So IPES is very detailed. We look at a lot of different aspects of the property, and it's a more accurate score than a Bailey score. So all other parcels are evaluated under Bailey. So that's multifamily parcels, commercial parcels, single family dwellings that were built prior to 87. Those are all going to have a Bailey score. And that score is a score from 1 to 7. 1 to 3 is considered low capability. 4 through 7 is considered high capability. And each one of those numbers corresponds with a percentage of allowable coverage. So, for example, class 1 is allowed 1% coverage. Class 4 is allowed 20% coverage. 5 is 25% coverage, and class 7, 6 and 7 are 30% coverage. So that determines your base allowable coverage on a property. 30% is the max for both the IPES scores and Bailey scores. So just get that in your mind. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to jump a little bit into coverage transfers, but I also want to really address this table here on the left. That is the maximum parcel coverage table, and that's in the Code of Ordinances. So depending what's greater is what you get to use for the maximum allowed on a property. So that's base allowable or the max allowable, whichever is greater, you'll use on your property, or grandfathered in coverage. That could be determine the max allowable. So can I transfer more coverage to my parcel? Depends on your parcel. Like I said, each one is different. And so you're going to use this table to see if your property is already at that amount. One example I want to give is a parcel that's 5,000 square feet. That's a very common parcel size in the Lake Tahoe Basin. And so if it's allowed the max base allowable for coverage on a 5,000 square foot lot, 30% of that would be 1,500. But if we look at this table, the max allowable is 1,800. So a 5,000 square foot lot would potentially be eligible to transfer in an additional 300 square feet to get up to that 1,800. Just to give an example. So parcels aren't to exceed their base allowable or their max allowable here, except for town centers. There is some code language about town centers being eligible to go up to 70% coverage. So if the property's in the town center, it can go up to that 70%, and that's in the code, and we can read through that together if you have specific questions on a property. So if you are eligible to transfer in coverage, it has to be from an equal or more sensitive property. Land capability 1 through 3 is not eligible to add additional coverage. And there's some restrictions on those properties because they're sensitive. There are some exceptions to that for access or other things, and that's spelled out in the code. If you want to transfer coverage or you are eligible, it has to be part of a project. So you have to have a project in saying, I need this additional 300 square feet or whatever it might be. And typically with coverage transfers, it has to be within the same HRA, which is hydrologic related area. And so that means the coverage you're going to purchase from another property has to come from that same area. There's some exceptions to that if the coverage is low capability and it's going to high capability. Next slide. So now I'll talk about development rights. And so what development rights, they encompass all of our commodities, I'll call them. So we have tourist accommodation units, TAUs, commercial floor area or CFA, residential units of use or RUUs, multifamily residential units of use, and then a potential residential unit of use. So almost all vacant properties that are to be developed as a single family dwelling come with a potential residential unit of use or PRUU. And so in order to build a home on a vacant property, like I said, it comes with this PRUU. You need to get then an allocation from most likely your local jurisdiction. And then so once you get that allocation, that's kind of your ticket to build, and that creates what we would call an RUU once that unit is built. So one other thing I'll just say, just to relate to what Karen was talking about, let's say you do want to build an ADU, you would need to acquire this RUU or one of these other development rights and convert it, which we'll talk about in 1 minute. So next slide, please. So more on transfers of development rights. You know, it could be any one of these things: residential, commercial, tourist accommodation. It does not have to be part of a project, unlike coverage. When you want to transfer a development right, you can transfer it just solely to bank it on a property. Let's say you have a project, you know, in 3 years and you found one today, you'd be eligible to transfer that now. So the other really cool thing about development rights is they can be transferred anywhere in the basin. There's no restrictions on staying in the jurisdiction it's in or in the same HRA. The development right does have to be verified as legally existing and banked to be able to be transferred. And so let me talk quickly about being banked. So let's say you have 4 units, or let's say you have 4 motel units, TAUs, and you want to make those units bigger and you're going to eliminate one. So then you'll do a project and remove 1 unit and get a permit for that and prove that it's removed. That would officially bank 1 TAU unit. It would require a banking permit with TRPA. So in that case, that's when we know this unit could be transferred. The value of development rights is set by the open market. TRPA doesn't technically get involved in that. And if you're using the development right, the receiving parcel must be high land capability. And then one last thing I want to mention here is the TDR marketplace, that's transfer of development rights. So we know people are acquiring these things and wanting to potentially sell them. And so we host something called the TDR marketplace on our website on trpa.gov. And it's kind of like a Craigslist that we host. We don't manage it, but you can go in there and post something you have that you're selling, or post something you need, and then other people can see that. So that's on our website, trpa.gov, and then you'll go to the TDR marketplace. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are the steps for transfers? You definitely want to make sure that the unit was verified. It has to be banked. I already kind of talked about that. If it's coming from a private property, then a TRPA application is required for a transfer. If you're working with the California Tahoe Conservancy or Nevada Division of State Lands, then you don't need to apply with TRPA. The CTC and NDSL are part of our MOU partners, and so we work with them and we call them our land banks. And so we have an MOU with them, and so they're able to do transfers on behalf of TRPA and know our rules and regulations. So if it's coming from a private property, you apply with TRPA. If you're working with the land bank, you work directly with them and don't need to apply with TRPA. So next slide. So this slide's kind of really fun. I think conversions are something, you know, it's relatively new, 2018, and really kind of cool. So development rights can be converted into different development rights. For example, on this table, it shows you what can be done. 300 square feet of commercial floor area can be converted to 1 tourist accommodation unit, 1 single family residential unit of use, or additional multifamily residential units of use. So when Karen was talking about if you are building a just regular ADU, not a deed restricted, affordable, moderate, or achievable, then you need to acquire a development right. So, but you're not limited just to finding an RUU. You can find 300 square feet of CFA, you can find a TAU, or an RUU. So this is something really cool that came about and can really help with development projects. So next slide. So one last thing I want to talk about is bonus units here for transferring from sensitive areas or areas that are farther from a town center. So if there's a parcel that's, let's call it stream environment zone, which is SEZ, let's say it's wet, historically a flooding parcel, and it's super far away from a town center. So let's say you retire that lot, you remove the RUU or whatever development is on it and transfer that development right to a city center, you can get up to 5 bonus units for that development in the city center. So it's a real incentive from moving development from sensitive or far away areas into our city centers. So that's something cool just to know about and help work for these bigger projects in the town centers. So next slide. So this is an interactive thing. We're going to ask a question. Make sure you all were listening. Can I transfer development rights outside of my jurisdiction or the HRA?
All right, we've got about 40% of people have participated, so we'll keep it open for another 5 seconds or so.
And so just a reminder, development rights are TAUs, RUUs, CFA, MFRUUs, PRUUs.
Great. All right, I'm going to end the poll here and share the results.
Yay. Okay, so yes, you can transfer development rights outside of your jurisdiction or HRA. They can be transferred anywhere in the Lake Tahoe Basin. No limitation on development right transfers for location. All right, next slide. We got one more question here. Do I need to have an approved project before I can transfer the development rights?
Okay, we have about 40% participated so far. We didn't warn you that there would be a test.
And this is a learning opportunity. Just kind of nails it going home, right?
All right, I'm going to end the poll here. Share the results.
Okay, so good. I'm glad that we asked this question. I want to clarify. So you do not need to have an approved project for transferring of development rights. You do need to have an approved project if you want to transfer coverage. But for development rights, you can transfer them at any time without needing an approved project. You can actually bank them on any property that you want or you own or that you might use later or just a holding property. So you don't need to have an approved project to transfer development rights. You can bank them on any property. So glad we asked that and can clarify that. I think that's the last slide for me, V. I think it's back to you. So it doesn't look like there's any questions.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat, Ali. Ali is one of our expert planners that we have on the team. We're so lucky to have her, and she actually was nominated for a Blue Ribbon Award. So a great resource for you if you ever have any questions. And if you do, keep them coming in that Q&A window, and we will be sure to address them. But I think we can move on to the next slide for now. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, V.
So a last little note here, we wanted to end with just a brief bit of information on piers and moorings. So in 2018, the TRPA governing board approved a new shoreline plan. At some point, I guess we're going to have to stop calling it a new shoreline plan. But this shoreline plan lifted a long-standing moratorium on new shore zone structures at Lake Tahoe and set caps and regulations for new shore zone structures like piers, moorings, buoys, public boat ramps, etc. So new piers are subject to different lotteries. And this pier lottery is held biannually on odd years. So we had one in 2019, 2021, and here it is 2023. And this new pier applications will be available for submissions from June 1st through June 30th. And then on July 19th, our staff will actually conduct the drawing for the lottery. And we can do up to 12 new private piers for every 2 years. And if there's any remaining balance, then they roll over to subsequent years. Next slide, please. As far as moorings go, the shoreline plan authorizes up to 1,486 new private moorings at Lake Tahoe, and this includes buoys, boat lifts, and boat slips. And 15% of the remaining pool is available for permitting annually through a mooring lottery. So the shoreline plan does require property owners to register and permit all existing moorings with TRPA, and these registrations are renewed annually through our registration system, which you can see on the link here. And again, we will be sending out these slides afterwards. So if you have any specific shoreline or mooring or pier questions, I encourage you to reach out to shoreline@trpa.gov, or you can specifically contact Zach Davis. He is our assistant environmental specialist who has been responding to a lot of the questions on piers and moorings. And let's see here. Question, if the Tahoe Keys home does not have a dock, do they need to rely on the lottery? Does anyone here know the answer? Allie? Great.
I'm not sure I know the answer. I'm going to say you want to email shoreline@trpa.gov. But my understanding is the Tahoe Keys is slightly different than putting a mooring in Lake Tahoe, the proper Lake Tahoe. So my understanding is you'll work with the Tahoe Keys HOA on that situation. But go ahead and email shoreline@trpa.gov because we have a whole team that deals with this more than I do, or Trevor, I should say.
And another question just came through about multi-use and if that's included in the 12 new piers this year. Do you know the answer to that, Allie, or would we also want to direct to Zach?
I'm pretty sure that includes both multi and single. And so like maybe 5 of them are multi and, the other 7 are or I'm not sure. So I don't want to give wrong information here, but I'm pretty sure it includes both. I'm not sure what the difference is in the numbers though.
Okay, and actually looking online, and I can put the link in the answer to your thing, it says the shoreline plan prioritizes multiple use private piers that serve 2 or more property owners. And of the 128 additional private piers, no more than 20% or 25 piers may be single parcel piers. So I'll share a link to that for you in your question. I don't see any other ones, so let's move on to the next slide, please. All right, well, I did want to just provide a few ways that you can keep in touch. As you can see, there's a lot of information and it's constantly evolving. We're trying to make it easier and simpler for you while maintaining these environmental protections. So please sign up for our e-news. As I mentioned before, we do have an e-news specifically for real estate professionals. It's how we let you all know about this webinar every year. So if you haven't already, go ahead and put your email into the Q&A and I will be sure to add you to that e-news. We also have an environmental newspaper called Tahoe In Depth. It's published twice a year, once in the summer and once in the winter. And it really lets people know what's going on in the basin. What are the environmental projects? Usually what are some articles of interest, things that are happening? And that is mailed out to every homeowner in the basin. And so it's a great way to get information out there. If you're interested in sponsoring or writing an article for Tahoe In Depth, go ahead and reach out to me. Again, Victoria Ortiz with TRPA, and I'm happy to connect you with our managing editor. And last but not least, I recommend that you follow our social channels. We have Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And that's how we share what's happening as it's happening. So it's a great way to stay up to date on all of that information. Next slide, please. And of course, if you glean nothing else from this webinar, we hope that you will bookmark these really important sites so that you can get to all of the information that was just shared today. So that's trpa.gov, where you can find all of those permitting applications as well as more information. And then the parcel tracker, which Trevor expounded upon, that's parcels.laketahoeinfo.org. So please bookmark those for your future reference. Next slide. All right, well, thank you. We have come to the end. It looks like we still have about 15 minutes left. So we can go through and answer any other questions if you have them. I see a lot of you have added your emails into the Q&A. Thank you. I'll be sure to note those down and add them to our e-news. And one thing you might also want to check is that TRPA, sometimes these e-news, because they're bulk, they go into spam. So you might want to check your spam folders. And if anything does go in there, you'll want to make sure to mark us as a trusted resource. So I will be sending out this presentation as well as all of the helpful resources and links for you to everyone who's on that e-news. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions, we are happy to answer those now or into the future. You have those numbers. Let's see, I have one question here on ADUs. So I think, Karen, this one will be for you. Do we need to? Okay, can you clarify for ADUs on the California side, do they have to have a bonus unit? Do they have to go that route to get an ADU? Or how can they get an ADU on a parcel?
Yeah, thanks. So to build an accessory dwelling unit, you do have to get that residential development right. So that means you either have to get a residential unit of use, and Ali talked about some ways to get those, or you can deed restrict it and get a bonus unit. So it doesn't have to be deed restricted. You don't have to use a bonus unit, but you do have to get that residential unit of use or that permission to build.
Thank you. Good clarification. And Shay, if I could have you jump on real quick, we wanted to just let people know about that Tahoe Keys landscaping book. Do you mind speaking to that and how it might be a reference for some of the folks who are dealing with Tahoe Keys properties?
Sure, V, and I did put the link to that resource in the Q&A. We basically have a conservation landscape guidebook for the Tahoe Keys, but it is pertinent to other parts of the lake as well, and provides guidance for property owners on how they can view their property and think about ways in which they can do landscaping that not only meets BMPs and fire defensible space, but also uses landscaping materials that are, don't require frequent irrigation or fertilizer, and the process that you would go about looking at your property from the curb appeal zone to the side yard zone where BMPs are often implemented, and then the outdoor living zone. And for lakefront properties, we have the lake clarity zone, thinking about if you do have an area of lawn, just making sure that you have some native vegetation as a buffer between that lawn and where any irrigation of that would flow off the property.
Excellent, thank you. It's a beautiful resource. Shay and the BMP team have put a lot of time and energy into it. And as she said, it was designed for the Tahoe Keys, but it's relevant to properties all around the lake. So I encourage you to take a look at that, and we'll be sure to add a link to that after the webinar.
Thanks, Dee.
Thanks, Shay. Okay, let's see here. Another question that came in here. Again, ADUs, Karen, popular item for this webinar. Could a storage shed be converted into an ADU? And if so, what's required?
Yeah, so anything that meets building standards can be converted into an ADU. So if your local jurisdiction is, able to write a building permit for that, that's fine. So the good thing about converting existing space is you don't, if you already have the allowable, that coverage is probably already legal on your parcel. So you wouldn't need to get additional coverage, but you do still need to turn in a permit and you need to request an ADU permit from TRPA and also that building permit from the local jurisdiction. So you do need to show again that you have that either the residential unit of use or the bonus unit, even to convert existing space. That's the main thing that we're looking for in your in a permit that you turn into TRPA for an ADU that's for conversion of existing space. Sorry, that was a little long.
No, that's helpful. Thank you, Karen. Hopefully that answered your question that you had in the chat there. Allie, were you going to tie on to that? Or just you knew that the next question was going to be directed to you? Okay, I'll go into that next question here. So we did get one that said, how do you find out if your property already has a banked RUU, residential unit of use? So for instance, if two underlying lots were merged, how could you know if there was an RUU already existing on that property?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of want to clarify a couple things here. So if there was two vacant parcels that were merged, both of those vacant parcels would come with a PRUU, which is potential residential unit of use. So potentially there is a PRUU that's banked, and you could go through the banking application with TRPA to confirm that and officially bank it and get an official letter. The other way to determine if a RUU is banked, and the way an RUU would be banked is if an RUU was removed. So let's say there was a home there and that home was removed, that would be how you would bank the RUU. So if that did happen since 1987, there's probably records of it with TRPA. So I would check the website laketahoeinfo.org, the parcel tracker.
Excellent. Yeah, I think a recurring theme you'll hear here is go to the parcel tracker to see if there's existing information about that parcel. Great. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any additional questions. I'll give it just another 10 seconds or so. And if nothing comes through, then we will give you back 7 minutes of your day. Thank you again for joining us. And if you have any additional questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to all of the resources that were provided on this webinar. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to working with you into the future. Take care.